Hello. Back here, this time for product talks. And once again, we chose to start the conference and the talks, and people will eventually come in. We're fighting the same chicken or the egg question that we were fighting yesterday, and it seems the hallway is very, very interesting for lots of people. I'm happy now to start the product talks of the day and to introduce Edial Dekker. Edial is the co-founder of Hack the Overhead. I hope I didn't misspell this too badly. And Gidsy as well, which is a tech startup. And he's been the senior product manager of Eventbrite. He's got a great experience in product launches, and he's going to be taking the stage to share part of this experience with us. Edial, please join me. The floor is yours.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I will talk about building products, about making products, and also about like planning products. Yeah, I will talk from a founder's perspective and like a product manager perspective. So yeah, my title is Shipping Beautiful Products. I won't discuss much design, but my background is design. I started a design studio in Berlin. I'm originally from Amsterdam, actually. And it was called Your Neighbors, and we did interactive design and mostly web typography things and responsive designs. Then I started this organization called Hack the Overhead, which translates to Hack the Government. And basically, it's a kind of group of people, and we scrape government websites and we republish the data so that machines can read it, right? So we create APIs around it. We do hackathons around it. So it's all sorts of data. It's like Chamber of Commerce data, or it's like transportation data. It's all sorts of things. That organization still exists. It's 7 years old now, and yeah, it's going really well. It's like 5 people working on it full time. After that, I started a company called Gidsy together with my brother and a friend, Philip. And it was basically like an Airbnb kind of place for activities. And it got acquired by another company called Get Your Guide. And I worked there for a while, and then I joined Eventbrite, which you all know probably too. It's mostly online ticketing, and now I'm helping this company called Travelbird. And Travelbird is a website where you can find really good deals. Yeah, it's kind of like flash sale model for travel. It's based in Amsterdam, growing extremely fast, 5 years old, like 600 people, and I'm in the product team there. It's a very small engineering product team. Yeah, so these are just my lessons, right? Lessons I learned in like, I don't know, 10 years of building products. Things will be different for you, things will be different for your industry, for your startup, for your size. This is kind of like my lessons learned from kind of like a small to medium-sized company. I think Eventbrite is much bigger, but I will just stick to the things that I learned, I think, that are applicable for founders and product people in general. So who here is a founder? Okay, so it's like half. Who is like product, founder, or that's most of the people. Cool. So I have 3 topics. I have road mapping, I have building, and shipping as 3 topics. I think they're all intertwined, and you also see this. I come from a specific kind of like line of thought. So all these things will always like mix up. Yeah, as you know, I think there's a lot of. You can describe someone who does product in a lot of different ways, like CEO of a product is one. I don't completely agree with that, and I will go into that a little bit later. But it always means that you're end responsible for everything, right? You're responsible for making the feature, to think about the feature, to develop it, to execute it, to move numbers, etc., etc. You're always responsible for everything. And I think that is a CEO in the end. So I do think there's some sense to it. But yeah, let's start. So I think it's very important that you decide what you're going to build, right? I think it always starts with that. So I think there's a few things that I learned with coming up with this idea of like, okay, you're going to do certain things and you want a certain speed with that, right? A certain velocity of building that, and you want to make sure that everything is kind of aligned, right? So I normally start with thinking about 3 months ahead. I think that's the max. I think if you're a little bit bigger, maybe you need like, you have bigger projects. But if a project is longer than 2 or 4 weeks, I think when you're a very early stage, I think you have a problem. But I think planning ahead for 3 months is a good kind of like good set to start with. So I think milestones are really important. Like when I first did my first start of Gidsy, we didn't really have milestones, and we're an extremely product design focused team. And that caused a lot of problems because things were never finished, right? Because we always wanted to improve it and we always wanted to make it just a little bit better. And yeah, I think we focus way too much on our product, which is difficult to say from a product perspective, right? But I do think so. I think it was cost us a lot of time and also money. And I think milestones are extremely important. I think if you have a roadmap, you kind of have like a sequence of the things that you want to do, and it will make you decisions that are based on shipping. So I think milestones are great. I think aligning people and product needs and dependencies of the rest of the company is also a really important thing. I think it becomes more important when you're bigger, or maybe when you do more, SaaS or like business to business, or you have like a big sales team or whatever. It really matters that you start planning things, because if other people are dependent on that feature or whatever, it becomes important that you communicate what you're going to build and why. I think the other thing is that no matter, like, I also noticed this, like, you can be a product manager in a company or you can be a founder, you always kind of report to someone, right? And often maybe it's an investor, maybe it's your boss, maybe it's your co-founder, etc. I think planning helps to report, to report the purpose, like, why are you doing this? So plan up to 3 months, but I think it's important to plan, like, strategize ahead, right? So don't stick to these 3 months. Like, maybe you want to change something really fast. Make sure you do that too, right? Like, think of 3 months, but always like be sure that it's flexible. This is kind of like my general philosophy. I think about building products and setting goals. This definitely comes from like a founder's perspective, but I also think it's very, very important if you think about product roadmaps. I think it's very important that you explain a problem to someone and you let other people think about that problem, and you make sure to ask them of how they can find the solution, right? I think that's a really much better way of delegating what needs to be done. Yes, I mean, sometimes people are junior and they will make mistakes, and that's exactly what you want to have, right? I think it's very hard that I will tell someone what to do, this person will make a mistake, and then this person will be like, yeah, of course it didn't work, right? This person doesn't learn anything from that experience. I think there's lots of important lessons that people fail, but also that you give a problem. So if you have this, I think it's much nicer to say, like, hey, if you say, let's fix problem with solution Y, right? That's kind of like how a lot of, like, I think bad managers do it, and also bad founders. They will be like, oh, I know this stuff, right? Like this and this is how you do it. Just execute it. I think the much better way is to do it the other way around, where you say, like, hey, we have a problem, that's X, and you come up with a solution. I really believe in that kind of like product philosophy of building products. Also, it creates much more creativity, right? Like, if you always have limited resources, I will go into that a little bit more, but yeah, I think it creates a sense of urgency, a sense of like agency, and also, it creates ownership of the problem, right? Because I think if you're building products, you're always solving problems. That's the one thing I think that every good product person has in common. One thing that I learned at Eventbrite, and I think that's a really nice thing, it's kind of like the idea of themes, right? So you have 3 months that you are planning, and I think it's really nice because you can, especially if you're small, you can do everything, right? You can build any kind of project. Like when your company is very young, you haven't found product market fit, you could basically build anything. But I think it makes sense if you focus on a specific theme, maybe. So maybe it's like retention, maybe it's like acquisition, maybe it's like, I don't know, mobile growth, maybe it's short-term revenue, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a better metric system, whatever, anything. If you focus, it makes sure that you're able to narrow down on what you want to do, and I think that's extremely helpful. I think it also creates ownership, right? Again, so it becomes like a team effort. So if everyone is very clear about what needs to be done and what the theme is, then people will start thinking about this a lot more. It creates expertise as well. Yeah, I think there's lots of good things from working with themes, and you can also have multiple themes. I think when the company is bigger, it's also very hard to steer a company that's very big. Like at Eventbrite, for example, we had this thing where, that was like 2.5 years ago, where we found that the mobile web experience was not looking good for our customers and also our numbers. Like we were kind of like frustrated, and we had this, we were kind of like feature teams. But the whole mobile web experience was kind of like owned by no one, right? Which often happens when the company gets bigger. Like you all have these experts, but no one focused on the entire flow. So then we decided like, hey, we're going to spend 8 weeks just on mobile web. So no one else in the company can do anything except focus on mobile web. And I think that was really, really cool because it was definitely an immediate business need, right? We need to solve that, but it's really hard to get everyone to think about a certain problem. So that was like a theme. It was 8 weeks, and the rule was you cannot work on anything else. It was really, really nice. Yeah, learned a lot. People, like everyone had to start doing front-end code and back-end code, and we were touching code that wasn't touched for years. Really, really cool. I've never seen something kind of like after that either. Like it's a big company, lots of people who do different things. People are really good at certain things and haven't done other stuff. It's amazing to see what happens if everyone has a focus. And product engineering, yeah, it's great, of course, to have a focus together. I think you will see this thing coming by a lot, I think. Yeah, it's basically the idea of missionaries versus mercenaries, right? So it's basically the idea that, yeah, how do you build product? How does your product team look like? How does your company think about what needs to be built? Is it going to be kind of like vision? Like, is it going to be like working together, being open, etc., etc.? Is it like nice, or is it kind of like very much focused on executing, right? I think there's different ways. Like, I think the extremes are kind of like, Rocket Internet in Berlin, for example. It's very hard not to argue that they're mercenaries, right? Like, they don't really care about creativity, they just care about getting stuff done. And they're way faster than anyone else, right? Their product teams, they can launch startups in like, 90 days? They have like this whole plan, like day 15, do this, day 16, check if that's there, blah, blah, blah. It's this whole playbook for startups, which is, I think, really, really amazing. It's not something I'm super excited about, that idea, but I think if you're building product, it's very important to be more on the missionary place, right? So you want to have a vision, you want to communicate that, you want to explain the why to people, and you really want to be, you want to have a team that's focused on a problem, and you want to focus that problem together. I think it's very different from mercenary, but I will say this, that as soon as you've started figuring out what you want to do, the other thing is to build it. And I think building requires a little bit of mercenary. I think you have to be extremely strict. Like, you have to be extremely strict on what's in the scope, what's out of scope, what's being tracked, what's not being tracked, who's doing what, when are things being shipped, and you have to be kind of aggressive with this, I also found. Like, you should just not take shit from anyone. I think if you're building products, like engineering, front-end, design, like everyone will always have something. You have to be really strong with this too, I think, if you're building products. It doesn't mean you have to be not nice, but I do think you have to be hard. Like, you have to make compromises all the time, especially when a launch is coming. You just have to make compromises, and you have to make sure that everyone is cool with that. I think if you've done your planning for the upcoming 3 months, or maybe a sprint, or maybe 8 weeks, or whatever like kind of cadence you want to do, I think you will end up with, it will be successful if you can answer these 3 questions. So, what will be worked on for the upcoming, let's say, 3 months? What might be worked on? So this is kind of like the backlog. So so there's things that will be worked on, there's things that might be worked on. That might be worked on are like on the backlog. So depending on how things go, you might do that. And I think the third one, will not be worked on, is extremely important too. It's basically, what is not in the scope, right? I think when the company gets bigger, or even to investors, I think it's very important that you tell them it's not going to be worked on for the upcoming 3 months or whatever cadence you set. I think it's extremely helpful to communicate, because it's very clear communication, and it might be worked on later, but I think it's really powerful to say no, which is also a job of product people a lot, right? That's not rocket science, that you have to say no all the time. So let's talk about executing. I have some lessons. I won't go like really into the details of how to do user stories or whatever. Like, I'm just kind of like talking about, how do you make sure that when you've built something that it's going to be successful, right? Like, of course, there's nothing that can be sure of that. Like, there's no like magic formula for this. But I do think there's a few things that you can do to try to address that problem and to make sure that there's a higher chance of building a successful and beautiful product. What I always do, and I can't stress this enough, is how important it is to make kind of like an opportunity assessment, right? So you kind of like try to figure out what the product means that you're building, like how much impact can it potentially have. And even if this is like completely, made up, I still think you always need a number for this. And it's very hard to come up with a number. I think especially if you're small, but I do think it's an extremely important part of building products that you try to figure out how much output it has, right? So I'll go into that a little bit later, but you need to define success, right? If I'm going to ship this feature, what does success look like and what does failure look like? And I think you should be able to communicate that before. And you can be totally off, and that's okay, right? That's completely okay, but at least you should have an estimate. And I think it's important because it keeps you accountable, and it also creates this idea that you really have to think about what you're building, right? Because I think building is extremely expensive. Like, if you're a startup, you have limited time, right? Like you raise a round, maybe you have like 1.5 years or 2 years of runway. I mean, a lot of companies have much less. And if you get more money, you basically buy more time, right? To figure certain things out. More money means more people. You can spend, these people accumulate to more time. Time is the only thing that you're buying, and time is the only thing, of course, that no one has, right? Like, yeah, the guy just turned 30. We're all becoming older. There's nothing we can do about it. We're all getting old, and yeah, the one thing that startup has that's a benefit is that they can do things fast. But like every other company, everyone is on the same time. So time is extremely important, I think, the time of shipping. And so I'm using a lot of slides from, or like, yeah, ideas from Etsy and from Spotify. Yeah, I have a lot of friends at Spotify. I think they built a great kind of like product strategy and like product teams and how they do things. I think it's extremely inspiring. My brother works at Etsy as a design lead. So I'm also taking a lot of like their ideas about building products. If you can see this slide, there's basically like 4 steps, right? So it starts with thinking, then it starts with building, then it starts shipping, and then it starts with tweaking. There's 4 stages of every product. If you can see the top line, that is cost, right? So as soon as you start building, it becomes extremely expensive. But the thinking part costs very little, right? It's only one person who just has to figure out some stuff. And I think this is important. This also, I think, is important why you do this opportunity assessment. Because the more you think about it, well, not the more, but thinking about costs way less money than actually start building it. So make sure you spend some really proper time on thinking about what you want to do, and then only then start building. Shipping is of course expensive too. It always takes longer, etc., etc. But make sure you think about it. I think there's a lot of opportunity that a lot of startups miss because they just start building, which is really cool, but it's also really expensive. And yes, you can ship things very fast, right? But I do think there's a risk to this as well. Like, I don't want to like overemphasize it when you're too small, but for a bigger company, a lot of like really poor products and a lot of legacy come from the fact that it hasn't been thought out, right? So I think a lot of companies, they ship something and it's great if you can do it really fast, and then the feature kind of like dies, right? So they never tweak it or whatever. Maybe they worked on it for a long time. It never gets like the attention, it never grows. So 4 years later, it's maybe like, 4% of the revenue, which is pretty significant then. And you think, should we like kill this? But it's 4% of the revenue, doesn't make sense, but it's legacy, so maybe we just need to improve it. Like in the beginning, your ratio of new products will be extremely high, right? Compared to maintenance and compared to like, what's the legacy? We need to fix this. So yeah, think about your product. Think also about how expensive it is to build products, and only then start building and shipping. And the tweaking part is extremely important. So again, you have to set a goal before you start building products. That means that you set a success goal, a failure goal, and you think about it as KPIs, right? So for every product that you're launching, think about like, what do I want to increase here? Is it like email signups? Is it unsubscribes? I want to lower them. Is it, I don't know, daily active? Is it more revenue? Is it like net revenue? Whatever. Like think about what you want to do and think about these things per feature. So even if the company's goal is like revenue, make sure that your product goals also can reflect that, right? Because not every company goal is actionable on a product level. So think about KPIs per product. And set goals. I really think this is extremely important. Always set goals before you start building something. And sometimes it's extremely hard and people don't want to commit to that, which is fine, but at least have goals and expect this from everyone in your team. And don't just like completely make them up either, right? Because that doesn't help anyone. Like you have to be honest. You have to be honest about the things that you're building, about being successful and being unsuccessful. And if you don't set goals, the learnings of like you failing become much, much harder. And I think that's a problem, because you want to learn things as fast as possible, and you want to fail also as quick as possible. But if you never set goals, it's kind of impossible to fail. So yeah, set goals. Yeah, this is a slide from Etsy again. This kind of like touches the idea of data-driven product development, right? So if you're maybe starting, you think like, oh, I'm going to start with with an idea, then I'm going to build, right? I'm going to code, and then I will A/B test it maybe, right? A/B testing doesn't work for every company, of course, right? I think it's extremely exaggerated, kind of like in the whole product world, of how much it can mean to you, because you really need a lot of traffic and you need a lot of conversions, right? Like even for very big companies, it's very, very hard to do A/B testing on a massive, massive scale if you don't have the traffic. And if you're a very small company, this becomes even much harder, right? So I believe in A/B testing a lot, like a lot, and we have our own like, A/B testing experiment, like a framework, and we run a lot of A/B tests at the same time. But I'm also extremely skeptical when it comes to like young startups and what they try to do with A/B tests, because an A/B test that's statistically insignificant really means very, very little, at least to me. And yeah, you can disagree or agree, but please be careful with this. If you're going to use this, right? So yeah, as soon as like product has been shipped, you A/B test it, you see if it succeeds or not. You can maybe tweak it, right? That's like the last stage, and then you can maybe improve it. The much nicer way to build products though is the third column, right? So you think of an idea, you try to validate it as soon as possible, then you start building, you have a prototype, then you start testing, and then you make adjustments, right? A product is never finished, and also a product launch should never be finished until you reach your goal or you think you can no longer optimize it. Products are not here to ship and then never look at. That's a complete waste of your time and everyone else's time. So try to validate your idea as soon as possible. And I think there's some really cool techniques for this. Of course, you can do, you can get customers in your office. You can use things like Usability Hub or usertesting.com or other things. Sometimes you can also do it from a product perspective. So, for example, at one of the companies that I was at, we were thinking about adding chat as a functionality for support, right? So we get a lot of emails, we get a lot of calls. Does it make sense to add chat? And we didn't really know, but it was based on our like existing system. It was kind of like a big commitment to just start working on chat, and we were not sure about the cost. So what we did basically was like, we just had this little chat like balloon kind of like on the top right, and it just said like, chat. And then we would track the people that would click that chat, but there was no agent or something behind it. There was no system behind it. It would just say something like, oh, sorry, there's no like customer support people available now. But at least we knew how many people clicked that and were interested in this. So we also tracked it on different pages, so we knew what were the pain points and when are the times when people want to chat. I think it's a great way to do that kind of stuff. It's validation at its core, and it costs very little money to do this, right? Very little time to build. And I'm sure there's lots of other examples that you can use for this. I think it's extremely important to validate your product idea as soon as possible, even when you're small. I don't think there's an excuse for small or big companies to do this. I think you're exactly on the same level here, and responsibility. I learned a few things, or things I believe in. I'm not saying they're like the absolute truth, but I do think I have some like product principles that I really want to cover. I think one of them is like 80% of the output comes from 20% of the input, right? So you can spend your time on 80%. So 80% of your time will be spent on the 20% less of what you're going to do, right? Where you have an impact. And there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit, right? So you only want to spend on the things that can have a really big impact. And if you're big enough, then you can spend time on this last 20%. But it does not make any sense if you're a small company to start like optimizing on stuff that costs a lot of time and money to build. So always think about this like 80-20 rule. I think it's important to invest in things that grow. So you obviously need historical data for this, but you can also just look at this differently. And I will show you in a bit. And which stage of the company are you? And I will dive into this now. Here in the background, it's a graph, and basically it shows like traffic yeah, it shows traffic. It's like 100% of the traffic, and you see the blue line, and you see the orange line and the green line. And this is traffic. This is, yeah, for one of the graphs I looked at the other day, and it's like blue is desktop traffic, orange is mobile web traffic, and then green is tablets. So as you can see, that tablets is completely flat for this. Mobile web is like catching up to desktop traffic really, really fast. So what would you invest in, right? I would definitely pick the orange line. Like that's growing, and all the other stuff is flat or it's decreasing a lot. You can use data, right, in this kind of stories too. Make sure to always invest things that grow. I think this is an important one. Yeah, which stage is your company, right? So if you're starting out, it's very important that you realize that everything is open. Like, oh, you can do anything that you want. And you have all these moonshots ahead of you, right? When the company matures, I think strategic things become more interesting. You kind of know what works, what doesn't. You can optimize part, and then you have the end stage, which is a kind of like hard stage. I think if you're building products, it's kind of optimizing everything that you possibly can, right? There's no longer like these crazy ideas that can completely change the business. It's really focusing on the business that you have, making that strong at every end, and optimizing that. So yeah, understand in which part of your company is, which stage. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit like, so you've planned something, you've built something, and then you're kind of like ready to launch, right? I think one of the great things that you can do is like a bug party. And basically it's like the idea that feature is ready, it's maybe like on staging, and you think like, okay, it's ready to launch, let's test this. And you get everyone in the company, or depends on how big your company is, or your team, you get them together and you kind of make a test plan. And you make sure that even if it's one engineer that worked on this, that everyone is there and starts testing this feature. I think this is an extremely nice thing to create like a team, to make sure that everyone always feels responsible for everything. Even if you have like a QA team, which I think is kind of luxury, you still need this process where everyone feels ownerships of improving products before they launch. I think it's one of the most important things. If you want to be agile and you want to get things out of the door fast, it doesn't mean you can ship broken products at all. That's completely something different. This is a great thing. I learned this also at Eventbrite. There we had like product marketeers, so they would help product managers to launch a product. And a very important thing there was like internal communication. And basically, what I do now, if I build a product and I ship it, and it has a big impact on like people's workflow or maybe business, then I create a communication document. And basically, it lists everything about the product that everyone needs to know. So like it lists the goals, it lists like the KPIs, like it has a link to a dashboard where you can see the data. It has screenshots of old and new. It has information about which platforms it is on. It has information about things that are missing, things that are problematic, frequently asked questions, all this stuff. I think it's super nice. You spent like 45 minutes on this, and it creates like this document that's really, really helpful for the rest of the company. I also shared this like a template actually in my slide later. Show and tell, I think it's another important thing. Like you shipped something, celebrate it. Even if the product is going to fail, make sure to celebrate this, right? Lots of people worked on this. Don't take ownership as a product manager, right? Like you are just like coordinating. Like you're responsible for everything, but never ever take like credit or never take the credit. I think it's always the team that should get the credit. It's an important rule, but make sure you celebrate your launches, right? So tell the company what you build. Make sure there's an engineer explaining the story. Help this person with the story, with the narrative, with the goals. Always explain why you're doing this. Always explain the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think it helps. Yeah, I think there's another thing that I try to do as much as possible. On every Friday, I kind of like try to have, I think it's always like the product person is always metric focused, or should be at least, but not everyone on the team is. It's that much metric focus, or it's just not part of their job. So I think it's really nice that every Friday you at least try to share some metrics. So what are the current A/B tests that are running, which are concluded, like how does this feature do, how does this feature do that you launched 2 months ago? Try to give like an insight, like, oh, your mobile traffic is really like decreasing or increasing, or try to, try to have some kind of like data moment. I think it's nice to build this culture where people think about data and and how to make decisions on that. This is my last slide. I just want to say one thing. It's my biggest mistake ever, I think, that I made, and I made it a bunch of times. It's this idea that you can build a product or build a feature that's completely changing the business. I honestly really don't believe in this. I've never seen this in my life, and I think I've built 15 things where I thought this is going to be huge impact on our business. I don't think there is something like that, or I haven't seen it. So be considerate about your goals, and never think of like new features as completely changing your business. I think that's a big trap that a lot of people make, and I make it still. Like I get really excited about something, and I think I overthink like the impact of what it could have. That's it.
Any questions?
Yeah. Yeah, so the first question is, why Friday, this update, and why not on a different day? Well, we don't ship on Fridays, so I think it's always kind of like a boring day. So I'm trying to make it a little bit more exciting. Because shipping on Fridays is hard with the weekend coming up, and you don't want to have something in production that's breaking 2 hours after. It's extremely stressful. So I try to have Friday as a kind of like looking back and looking ahead kind of day. I think it's nice. The other question was like, how do you have multiple milestones within like 3 months? I think it's a good rule to set something like you can only work on projects that take 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, something like that. It makes sure that you always narrow down on time, and that you can identify really the things that are needed. I think it should be like if you're working on 4 things that are 3 months long, it becomes a really big problem, but always try to slice it into smaller chunks. I think it makes it easier to add milestones. Cool. More questions?
Thank you for the presentation. It was really, really awesome, actually. One question, if you can detail a little bit more, would be regarding validation techniques. What do you usually use for these ones?
I think the easiest thing is to get users to see it, right? If you have your customers nearby, or maybe you can run some Facebook ads that specifically target the people that could be interested in your product, or you pay for it through like an online service. I think that's probably the easiest to do. The other thing is to collect data, but I think you need to be much bigger for that. You could also try to validate it through like benchmark data, but I'm not a big fan of that because you just never know. I think there's different techniques for it, but get your customers in front of this feature as soon as possible, right? Even if it's a prototype. I think prototypes are extremely important. So make sure that your front end people also know how to design a bit. Make sure that every designer knows how to do prototypes. That helps. Prototypes are your best friend, I think, when you're building products. I think it's the only way to build products is to start with a prototype.
Thank you very much, Edial. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we're going to take the discussion at networking. Further on, I'm going to invite on stage. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.